Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we will finally be taking an in-depth look at the watch we unboxed in an earlier video. It's a watch from a brand that was recently on everyone's lips by offering all of their watches for 70% off. This is the Tribus Tri-03. Largely unknown before their sale, Tribus is a brand that has a big name behind it in the micro-brand world. Possibly one of the most successful micro-brands to date, Christopher Ward is recognized for offering well-made, beautifully designed watches at reasonable prices and earned a name for itself. At some point, the man himself, Christopher Ward, decided to leave the brand, as did his sons, and they have since started a new project called Tribus Watches. So, although few people would have heard or paid attention to the brand until now, anyone buying would be able to be rest assured that the watch delivered would be of excellent quality. Having spent some time with the watch now, I can confirm that it is. At the time of the sale, there was some speculation about why prices were so heavily discounted. One theory circulating was that the brand was shutting down and clearing out the last of their stock. This would have potentially caused issues if the warranty was ever needed to be called upon, especially considering that it lasts 3 years, longer than most other micro-brands. However, the brand is now taking pre-orders for their next batch of watches due April 2022. This would indicate that the brand is not shutting down and is planning on sticking around. One interesting thing to note about the watches currently available for pre-order is that only the silver and black cased watches are listed. There is no sign of any gold-colored cases like the watch I have here. One thing that draws many to micro-brands, including myself, is the value on offer compared to major brands. For the 70% off price that I paid, I'd have to say the value proposition was a very compelling one. For my $600 odd US, I received a Swiss-made, certified chronometer GMT with a power reserve indicator, with sapphire crystal, a display caseback, 150 meters of water resistance, a solid, well-finished case and classy design. Show me any other brand that offers that much value in a single package for a similar price. This is the first chronometer on the channel, but what exactly is a chronometer? For a watch to bear the name chronometer, it must pass certification in Switzerland, meeting standards for accuracy. Only a small percentage of watches made in Switzerland receive this certification. To receive it, a watch is tested over a period of 10 days and must maintain an accuracy between -4 and +6 seconds per day, ensuring that the accuracy of the watch is very high by mechanical watch standards. In general, certified chronometer watches are quite expensive. I saw one list compiling the best under $2,500, so even at its full price, the Tri-03 still represents good value as a chronometer. The movement housed in this watch is a Soprod C115. Soprod is a Swiss movement manufacturer which seems to have ties to Seiko, having its A10 movement design created by Seiko, off which this movement is based. It features 2 complications, one of which is fairly uncommon outside of Japanese or very high-end watches. Through the display caseback, we can catch a glimpse of the movement at work. In addition to being highly accurate, it is also very well finished, featuring Geneva stripes on the custom branded rotor, as well as perlage on the movement plates and bridges. The balance can also be seen ticking back and forth at 4 Hz, or 8 times per second, resulting in a 28,800 beats per hour rate. Located at the 12 o'clock position on the dial is our first complication, a power reserve indicator. This meter shows how much energy is stored in the mainspring and gives an estimate of how long the watch will run before it needs to be wound again. This is a complication usually seen on Grand Seiko spring drive models, high-end Citizen and Orient Star watches. It's a very useful feature and is nice to watch increase as you wind the crown. This subdial, as well as the GMT, are stepped, creating a nice depth effect on the dial. It also reveals the maximum power reserve of the movement at 42 hours. Opposite this at 6 o'clock is the GMT indicator. Rather than having a GMT hand on the central pinion, like many other movements, this watch gives the GMT its own subdial to independently display the second time zone. This also helps to unclutter the outer portion of the dial, not needing 24-hour indicators or markings. The GMT hand is adjusted using the recessed pusher at 4:30 on the case. In the unboxing, we saw that the watch comes with a small metal tool to operate this pusher, but I'd suggest using something like a toothpick instead to avoid scratching the watch. Taking a look at the dial as a whole now, it is quite clean and uncluttered considering its complications. All hour markers are applied batons, with thicker ones at 12, 3, 6, and 9, though 12 and 6 are truncated to make room for the subdials. The brand logo and name is present at 3 o'clock, and only the word Chronometer at 9. Around the outside of the dial, there are minute and quarter-minute tracks printed, as well as numerals at every 5 minutes. This creates an effect similar to what is called train tracks on a dial, and I think it frames everything nicely. At the bottom of the dial, the words Swiss Made are also discreetly printed, though due to the distorted edges of the domed sapphire crystal, they are not usually visible when looking at the watch face on. Very slim, polished needle hands match the applied markers. A complete lack of loom on the dial and hand pushes this watch in a much dressier direction, fitting in with the rest of the design, but it also does make reading the time in low light more difficult. The dial is a cream color, which looks very classy and vintage inspired. As we'll soon see, the case also embraces a vintage aesthetic and design. Of the 3 dial colors available, this is by far my favorite. It's such a rich and warm tone that really complements the gold color of the case and brown strap I've put the watch on. The crystal covering the dial, as mentioned, is domed and creates the smallest amount of distortion around the edges. It, along with the crystal on the display caseback, are sapphire, and the anti-reflective coating ensures that the view of the dial is as clear as possible, even in bright conditions. The curved edge of the crystal matches perfectly with that of the bezel where they meet. The case of this watch is made up of 3 parts: the bezel, the midcase, and caseback. It measures 41 mm across, with a height of 12.09 mm. The lug-to-lug is 50.5 mm, and the lug width for strap replacement is a standard 20 mm. Overall, the proportions of this watch work well together. The bezel is quite small for a watch of this size, and, being brushed, helps it to draw even less attention to itself. Looking at the bezel from the side, we can see that it gently curves as it comes up to meet the crystal. This rounded top to the watch, for me, really harks back to the vintage dress watches that the Tri-03 is taking inspiration from. The majority of the surfaces of this watch are brushed, with just a slim polished chamfer running along the top and bottom of the midcase, as well as part of the caseback. The midcase itself is slab-sided, which I like, but thanks to the curved bezel, does not make the watch feel particularly tall or chunky. From the side profile, we can also see that the lugs tone down nicely to help the watch wear flat on wrist. The caseback, as you'd expect of a micro brand, is a spec sheet for the watch, mentioning its sapphire crystal, Swiss-made chronometer status, as well as the 15 ATM of water resistance that the screw-on caseback and screw-down crown provide. This level of water resistance is quite unexpected, especially from a watch with such a dressy design, but is great to provide peace of mind when wearing the watch that there's virtually no risk of water getting into it in everyday situations. The crown is fairly short and unobtrusive, but the coin edge still offers easy operation when unscrewing. It's difficult to convey this through a video, but the unscrewing of the crown on this watch is so smooth that I wasn't completely sure I'd screwed it in the first time I used the watch. While we've got it unscrewed, let's try out the functionality of the watch. As I turn the crown winding the watch, you can see the needle on the power reserve indicator slowly climbing pulling out the crown, the second hand has stopped, or hacked, allowing you to accurately set the time on the watch, and as I move the time forward, we can see that the GMT hand jumps every hour, rather than turning continuously over time. Meaning, in order to look at the time in your second time zone, you will first have to look at the subdial for the hour, then at the main minute hand for the specific time. Since unboxing, I have replaced the strap on this watch with a brown leather one. The reason is not because the original was of poor quality. In fact, it was a very nice, comfortable strap. I just felt that brown suited my taste more than black. While this one does not, the original strap tapered slightly, helping the watch to feel smaller and more comfortable when on wrist. Looking quickly at the original strap, we can see a matching gold-colored buckle with the brand name. There is probably more polished surface here on the buckle than the rest of the entirety of the watch. It's very solid, milled from a single piece of stainless steel. Let's now get it on wrist and see how it wears. A bracelet would not have suited this watch, and even on the stainless steel version, I'd only want to wear a leather strap. As mentioned, those down-turning lugs help the watch to sit flat on wrist and wear comfortably. While larger than I'd probably like to wear, the 50.5mm lug-to-lug is not too big and doesn't have any overhang on my 7-inch wrist. It also manages its height very well. So, there's a lot to like about this watch, especially at the price I paid for it. But would I recommend you to pick it up, especially at its full price? In terms of quality and performance, absolutely. Even at its full price, it's an extremely well-made watch with a certified chronometer movement wrapped up in a well-designed, vintage-inspired package. But there's a but. While Tribus got a lot right with this watch, in my opinion, there is one thing they didn't. The size of the watch just doesn't seem appropriate for the style they created. In addition to the cream colors and curved crystals and bezels of vintage dress watches, they were also small in size, especially by today's standards. At 41mm, I think it's too big. Of course, for people with larger wrists it is fine, but I think Tribus tried to make one watch to suit everyone, rather than making a 39 to 40mm and a 42mm size. They split it down the middle and went 41mm. The small bezel and subsequent large dial really emphasize this too, giving the watch much more presence on the wrist than it needs. A quick comparison for the fun of it, with my Grand Seiko coming in at 42mm, really shows how much that dial size makes the watch feel larger than it is. At a glance, I think most people would say that the Tribus is the larger of the two. A watch I mentioned in the unboxing was the IWC Portuguesa chronograph, a watch that shares a similar design. While I wouldn't call this watch a homage, there are similarities to be drawn, including a 41mm case size. However, a reason that the IWC can pull off that size is because it's a chronograph. The watch needs to be larger so that the subdials are easily legible. IWC have also released a non-chronograph Portuguesa automatic in both 42 and 40mm size, rather than splitting that model down the middle. Food for thought. By no means do I think it looks too big for me. I just feel that a watch of this style should be slightly on the smaller side, rather than the larger side. For anyone with a larger wrist than 7 inches, it would most likely look fine, and even well-sized, but for me, and possibly the average person, it is just a touch too big. If you're considering buying this, just keep that in mind. What do you think about this watch? Did you hear about the sale and buy a Tribus? What do you think about the size? Too big or just right? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.